Sam&Cents, money that finally makes sense. In the summer of 1920, a smiling man in Boston guaranteed, in writing on signed promissory notes, to grow your money 50% in 45 days. Double it in 90. Tens of thousands of people just like you handed him everything. Clerks, immigrants, police officers, even some of the officials sent to watch him ended up investing. And here's the uncomfortable part. With only what you know right now, you probably would have too. But while that line of believers grew, a handful of people started counting instead of believing. One newspaperman did the only thing that ever beats a perfect story. And today, that same move takes you 10 minutes and no expertise. This is the duel between the best money story in America and simple arithmetic. Arithmetic 1, stay to the end, and you'll be able to run it yourself. Charles Ponzi was not a genius. He was a hustler who had spent 15 years hunting for the angle. He arrived in America in 1903, and by his own account he'd gambled away most of his money on the boat over, landing, as he later put it himself, with $2.50 in cash and $1 million in hopes. He waited tables. He served time in Montreal for forging a check, and in Atlanta for smuggling Italian immigrants across the border. By 1920 he was in Boston, broke, 38, still hunting. Then a letter arrived from Spain, and inside it was a small postal coupon that would become the greatest alibi in the history of fraud. The coupon was real, and that is what makes this story dangerous. It was called an international reply coupon. If you wrote to someone overseas and wanted to prepay their reply, you bought one, and they could swap it in their own country for postage stamps. Here's what Ponzi noticed. After the war, European currencies were cheap and the dollar was strong, so a coupon bought for pennies in Italy could, on paper, be redeemed for several times its cost in American stamps. Buy low in a weak currency, redeem high in a strong one. On paper, a genuine gap in the world's money, and a genuine-sounding idea is exactly what a great lie needs to stand on. Now follow the coupon one more step, because this is where it quietly falls apart. The coupon doesn't turn back into cash, only into stamps. To make real money, Ponzi would have needed to buy coupons by the millions, pennies at a time, ship them across an ocean, redeem each one by hand, and somehow turn warehouses of stamps back into dollars. The handling alone would have eaten the profit. It could not be done at any real scale. And when it was all over, the auditors found that against the millions he took in, Ponzi had bought almost no coupons at all, about $61 worth. A near-empty drawer. The idea was real. The business was a stage set. Around the start of 1920, Ponzi opened a company with a serious-sounding name, the Securities Exchange Company, on School Street in downtown Boston. The pitch fit on a dinner napkin. Give me $100, and in 45 days I hand you back 150. Backed, he said, by those clever European coupons. To feel how loud that was, put it next to the typical benchmarks of the era. Estimates, not measured figures. A savings account paid a few percent a year. A good year in stocks meant high single digits. Ponzi was offering more in 6 weeks than ordinary money earned in years, and he made it sound like arithmetic. So where did the money actually come from? Not from coupons, from the next person in line. The first investor hands over $100. Weeks later, a second and a third hand over theirs. And Ponzi uses that fresh money to pay the first investor back his 100 plus 50 in profit. The first investor is thrilled. He has proof. He tells everyone he knows. Nothing was invested. Nothing earned a return. Money walked in the front door and straight out the back. It's musical chairs where the music is a promise, and it only plays as long as more people walk in than walk out. By July of 1920, Ponzi needed something every modern scheme also needs: better press. So he hired one of Boston's veteran publicity men, William McMasters, to manage his story. Remember that name, because the man hired to polish the legend was about to become the first person to see it from the inside. Hold that thread. The line on School Street is still growing, and the story now has 2 clocks running. How fast the money comes in and how fast one insider's doubt does. And the money came in like weather. By that summer, School Street was jammed. People lined the block, cash in hand, pushing to get in. In the final weeks, money arrived faster than the clerks could count it. Hundreds of thousands of dollars a day in 1920 money. Clerks brought paychecks, immigrants brought savings, police and politicians invested, and some of those sent to watch him ended up investing too. Early winners reinvested instead of cashing out, and their testimony was the best advertising money never had to buy. Ponzi bought a mansion in Lexington. He gained effective control of a Boston bank, the Hanover Trust. For a few weeks, he may have been the most trusted man in the city because the machine was still turning and almost no one had done the math. Here is where the duel truly begins, and it begins honestly with a mistake. On July 24, 1920, the Boston Post ran its first big story on Ponzi, and it was a rave. Credulous, glowing, it boosted him. Then the paper turned. The Post's young acting publisher, Richard Grozier, running the paper while his father lay ill, decided to dig instead of cheer, and staked the paper on the investigation despite a libel risk that could have sunk it. And the Post turned to Clarence Barron, the most famous financial journalist of the era, who asked the one question that kills stories like this. For this story to be true, what has to exist, and how much of it? Run the numbers, and to back the money Ponzi had taken, about 160 million reply coupons would have had to exist. About 27,000 were in circulation, in the entire world. Not probably false, arithmetically impossible. That's the whole tell, and it never changes. Ask what must be true, then go count. While Barron counted from the outside, McMasters finished counting from the inside. Weeks into the job, Ponzi's own publicist concluded that the man he was paid to polish was running on nothing but new deposits. So he flipped, and yes, he sold the story. The Post paid him for it, and this channel tells you that. On August 2nd, 1920, the Boston Post ran McMasters' first-person expose under a headline you can still read today. Declares Ponzi is now hopelessly insolvent. By McMasters' own arithmetic, Ponzi was at least $2 million in debt. The hired storyteller had become the first defector from the story. Years later, McMasters would describe his old client as a financial idiot who could barely add. That's his later recollection, not the 1920 page. But the 1920 page was enough. The spell broke in days. The line on School Street reversed. The same crowd that had shoved to get money in, now shoved to get it out. And Ponzi, cool to the end, did the only thing a scheme like this can do. He stood in the doorway and paid, handing the newest investors' money straight back to the frightened ones, buying calm by the hour. It bought him days. It could never buy a fix because there was no fix. There was only the line, and the line had turned around. In August, the auditors finished, and the number was brutal. Ponzi had taken in an estimated $15 to $20 million from tens of thousands of people, well over $200 million in today's money, roughly, in inflation-adjusted terms. Against all of it, no investments, millions in the hole, and the coupons that were supposed to explain everything amounted to about $61 worth in a near-empty drawer. He pleaded guilty that November. Prison. Deportation to Italy in 1934. And in January 1949, Charles Ponzi died in a charity ward in Rio de Janeiro, with just about enough to cover his own burial. The man who guaranteed to double your money died with almost none of his own. And the people who counted, they got a receipt. In 1921, the Boston Post won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service for the Ponzi expose, the first Pulitzer ever won by a Boston paper. Think about what actually beat the best money story in America. Not a regulator, not a crash, a capacity question, a young acting publisher willing to risk his paper, an insider willing to defect, and a printing press. Arithmetic, plus courage, plus ink. Remember the recipe. In a few minutes I'll hand you the modern version, and yours doesn't require owning a newspaper. Here's the part almost nobody knows. Ponzi didn't invent the thing that carries his name. 40 years earlier in the same city, Sarah Howe's Ladies' Deposit promised roughly 8% a month and collapsed in 1880 after press exposés. Sound familiar? 20 years before Ponzi, a New York bookkeeper named William Miller promised 10% a week, over 500% a year, the exact same way. Ponzi's name stuck because he was the biggest and the loudest. The machine was old before he was born, and it has outlived him by a century because it was never about coupons. It was about a story good enough to stop you counting. So let me hand you both tools, because a version of this will cross your path. In a group chat, a seminar, a friend who found something. First, the fingerprint. Every scheme shaped like Ponzi's promises a return that is high, steady, and guaranteed, wrapped in a story too complicated or too private to check. Real returns are lumpy, they have bad years. Nobody honest can promise you a number and a date. High, plus steady, plus guaranteed, plus don't worry how. That's not an opportunity, that's the music still playing. Second, the Barron move. Before your money moves, ask, for this to be true, what has to exist, and how much of it? Then actually count. One capacity question defeats most schemes because most schemes never expect anyone to do the arithmetic. It isn't cynicism and it isn't expertise, it's a procedure. In 1920, it took the most famous financial journalist in America. Today, it takes you a search bar and 10 minutes. Now, the modern printing press. In 1920, verification took a famous journalist and a publisher willing to bet his newspaper. Today, the counting tools sit on public websites. Your 10-minute check, 3 steps. 1. Check the seller, look them up on FINRA BrokerCheck or the SEC's advisor database. Registered? Any disciplinary history? 2. Check the product, search the offering on the SEC's EDGAR database or your country's register. Does it legally exist on paper? 3. Check the custody, who independently holds the assets. If the person promising the returns is also the only one holding the money, that's School Street with better fonts. One caveat this channel will always say out loud, these checks reduce your risk, they never eliminate it. Bernie Madoff's brokerage firm was registered, and he ran the biggest scheme in history on modern rails. That's exactly why the Barron move comes first. And watch for today's coupons. The 1920s prop was a real postal instrument misused as an alibi. Today's is a real technology, a trading algorithm, a staking pool, a market-neutral strategy, misused the same way. Most complex strategies are not frauds. Opacity alone is a flag, not a verdict. And when the pitch comes through the group chat or the neighbor who really got paid, remember School Street, early payouts recruited the victim's own mouths then. Testimonials and screenshots do the same job now. Social proof is marketing, not evidence. And it's not because the victims were stupid, that's the comfortable lie we tell ourselves so we can feel safe. The machine works because your neighbor got paid, and standing still while everyone around you gets rich feels like the real risk. Skepticism is not a personality, it's a procedure, a fingerprint, a capacity question, a 10-minute check. And underneath all three sits the oldest question in money. Where does the return actually come from? Really? Ask it out loud. Make them answer in plain words. If the honest answer is, from the next person who joins, you're not an investor. You're the return someone earlier is being paid. Charles Ponzi is gone. The line on School Street is gone. The Post's presses are gone. But somewhere right now, a version of that line is forming again. And this time, you're the one holding the arithmetic. So there it is, small boring moves that quietly win. If your money makes a little more sense now, hit subscribe to Sam&Cents. And the next one's right here, it picks up right where this leaves off. See you there.